Detroit, Michigan, 1985. Four brothers walk into a nightclub on the east side. They are hard to miss. Every one of them stands 6'2". Every one of them weighs over 234 pounds. They move through the room the way men move when they know nobody is going to step in their way. They are wearing matching jackets. On the front of those jackets, embroidered in big, bold letters, two words: best friends. The name was a joke, and also a warning, because these four men, Terrence, Reginald, Gregory, and Ezra Brown, were about to become the most feared murder crew in the history of Detroit, Michigan, in a city that had already seen Young Boys Incorporated, that had already seen Maserati Rick, that had already seen decades of organized violence on a scale most American cities never experienced. The best friends would make all of it look tame. 80 murders attributed to one crew from one city in less than a decade. The Detroit Free Press would eventually run a headline that said it plainly: "The best friends were the enemy of organized society in Detroit. This is their story." The Brown brothers grew up on Detroit's east side. Four boys, 1 year apart in age from each other, raised in the same neighborhood, the same streets, the same understanding of how the world worked and what it would take to get what they wanted from it. They weren't subtle about their ambitions. Ghost and Wizard, Gregory and Ezra, the two eldest, had the t-shirts made first, then the jackets, then the hats, custom ordered, best friends across the front in letters you couldn't miss. They all drove the same cars, different color BMW cars or custom-made Suzuki Samurais. Rolling through East Side Detroit in matching vehicles like a crew that wanted to be seen, wanted to be known, wanted the streets to understand exactly who they were before they even opened their mouths. And what they were from the very beginning was killers for hire. 1985. The Brown brothers formalize their operation. They become a murder-for-hire organization, $10,000 per contract, sometimes $30,000, whatever the market would bear for the specific problem that needed solving. Drug dealers who needed rivals removed, kingpins who needed enforcement, anyone who needed something done cleanly and permanently. The best friends did it. No questions, no hesitation, no loose ends left behind. Word spread fast on Detroit's east side about what these four brothers were capable of, and it reached the ears of the two most powerful men in the city's drug trade. Demetrius Holloway, the biggest cocaine wholesaler on the east side, a man his own attorney would later describe as someone who could have been a Fortune 500 CEO if he had been born into different circumstances. Smart, magnetic, feared, respected, and his right-hand man, Richard Carter. The streets called him Maserati Rick. Holloway and Carter needed muscle. Their operation was growing. The money was moving faster than their existing enforcement could handle. Rivals were getting bolder. The stakes were getting higher. They needed men who didn't hesitate. They met the Brown brothers at a downtown nightclub. Holloway made his assessment quickly. Burly, intimidating, quick trigger, men who took pleasure in hurting people and weren't shy about it. He brought them in. The best friends became Holloway and Carter's official enforcement unit, dispatched wherever justice needed to be administered on the streets of Detroit. They had a no-tolerance policy. You crossed Holloway once, you were done. The best friends were the ones who made sure done meant done. But here is what Holloway and Carter didn't fully account for. The Brown brothers had their own ambitions. They weren't satisfied being someone else's weapon. They wanted what Holloway had, what Carter had, the product, the money, the territory, the power, and they had already proven they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. Maserati Rick introduced the brothers to his own Colombian connection, a supplier the streets called Colombian Mike. It was meant to be a business arrangement that benefited everyone. It was the last mistake Maserati Rick ever made. The best friends used that introduction to build their own direct pipeline, their own supply, their own operation, no longer dependent on Carter or Holloway for anything. And then Boogaloo, Terrence Brown, made his move. Maserati Rick had been shot in a dispute with rival East Side dealers. He was lying in a hospital bed at Mount Carmel Medical Center, recovering, vulnerable. Boogaloo walked into that hospital and finished the job. Maserati Rick, one of the most powerful kingpins on Detroit's East Side, was murdered in his hospital bed by the man he had trusted as his own enforcer. Holloway saw what happened. He understood immediately what it meant. He faked his own kidnapping, staged a disappearance from a hamburger stand near Gracio and Interstate 94, and vanished before the best friends could reach him too. The two biggest obstacles to best friends' dominance on the East Side were gone. One dead, one running. The Brown brothers now owned Detroit's East Side. What followed was chaos, the kind of violence that made even hardened Detroit street veterans take notice. Rocking Reggie, Reginald Brown, once walked into a crowded indoor shopping mall at Christmas time. Families were shopping, children were with their parents. It was the most innocent possible setting. He pulled out an Uzi and opened fire on a best friend's lieutenant who had turned government informant. The lieutenant died. 4 of his cousins were hit as collateral damage. One of them was 3 years old. Rocking Reggie had just bonded out of state custody on another homicide charge the same day. He shot a man dead in a shopping mall at Christmas, an hour after making bail. That was the best friends. But empires built on pure violence have a specific weakness. They make enemies of everyone. Within the organization itself, the code that held other crews together was never fully present. The best friends killed their own enforcer, Patrick Jackson, known on the streets as Lunch Meat, when they suspected him of stealing. They killed him on June 13, 1987. Ghost, Gregory Brown, died December 27, 1986. He was shot dead, leaving an East Side bar. It was the same night as his brother Wizard's funeral. He was still wearing the same tuxedo he had worn to bury his brother hours earlier. He was 23 years old. After Ghost's death, Boogaloo and Rocking Reggie intensified everything. Anyone suspected of involvement in their brothers' deaths was murdered in retaliation. The body count climbed. The enemies multiplied. Authorities attributed over 80 murders to the best friends. 80. From one crew, on one side of one city. By 1993, the organization was collapsing from within. Terrence Boogaloo Brown, the architect, the founder, the man who had walked into Maserati Rick's hospital room and ended it, was found dead in an Atlanta hotel parking lot during the Freaknik Music Festival. His own associates had killed him. They believed he was planning to eliminate them first. The witched friends, who had turned on Maserati Rick, who had turned on Holloway, who had killed their own enforcer, had finally turned on each other. The only Brown brother still alive today is Reggie. He was released from prison in 2008. The Detroit Free Press said it best when they finally put it into words in December of 1993. The best friends were the enemy of organized society in Detroit. Not a gang that operated within the rules of the street. Not a crew that respected codes or alliances or debts. 4 brothers in matching jackets and matching BMWs who decided that the best way to get everything they wanted was to make sure anyone standing in the way did not live long enough to stay there. 80 murders, 1 hospital room, 1 shopping mall at Christmas, 1 tuxedo worn to a funeral, and then to a death. That was the best friends. And they are just the beginning of what we're covering today. Because what you're about to see across the next hour are men and organizations who operated by the same principle. No boundaries, no limits, no one powerful enough to contain them. This is bloody reports. And this is what happens when men decide that the only rule worth following is their own. Number 2, imagine you are a kingpin in New York City in 1986. You run a crew. You move kilos. You have $100,000 in cash sitting in a shoebox under your bed. You have bodyguards at every door. You have rooftop lookouts with walkie-talkies watching every car that turns down your block. You have cops on your payroll. You have judges on your payroll. You have your own mother driving a Mercedes because you paid for it in cash. Nobody can touch you. Rivals won't dare. The feds are still figuring out what crack even is. Every man on your block owes you something. You are untouchable. And then you come home one night and you see a car parked across the street that you don't recognize. You stop walking. You feel your heart speed up. You heard something at a club last weekend. Somebody said a name, the Boldens. You heard they hit a spot in Harlem last week and left 4 people dead in a kitchen. You heard they hit a stash house in Jamaica, took $100,000 in cash, and the 2 men guarding it, nobody ever heard from them again. You heard they don't sell, they only take. You heard they don't need money, they just want to take yours. You heard they are hunting kingpins, not for territory, not for revenge, not for business, but for fun. Just for the sake of saying they did it. Just to add one more name to a list they keep in their heads. Just to laugh about it later in some apartment in Queens while they count your cash. You stare at that car across the street. You put your hand on the gun in your waistband. You realize for the first time in your entire life as a kingpin, you are scared. Scared of a family, 4 brothers and their cousin, a regular black family from Queens, mother and father in the house, no crew, no empire, no territory, no supplier, just 5 men with nothing to lose and guns in their hands. Their last name was Bolden, and in 1986 they were the only thing in New York City that scared the kings. This is the story of the Bolden brothers, the family that hunted kingpins for sport. The Bolden brothers did not come out of a broken home. That is the first thing that makes their story different. Most YouTube gangster stories start the same way. Father gone, mother working 3 jobs, crack in the house, projects full of violence. Kid turns to the streets at 12. That was not the Boldens. Their parents were both in the house, mother and father, Queens, New York, working people, a normal middle-class black household in the 1970s, the kind of family where you went to church on Sunday, where you said yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, where you did your homework at the kitchen table. There were 4 brothers. Curtis was the oldest, big, quiet, physical, the kind of man who did not need to say much because when he walked in a room, everyone felt it. Henry was next, the shooter, the one with the temper, the one who would pull the trigger when nobody else would. Ernest was after that, the youngest of the 3 shooters, hungry, reckless, always wanted to prove he was as bad as his older brothers. Robert was the youngest, the driver, the quiet one, the last to join. And then there was the cousin, Isaac. Isaac practically lived at the Bolden house growing up. He was raised more as a 5th brother than as a cousin. He ate at the Bolden dinner table. He slept in the Bolden bedroom. His last name was different, but his blood might as well have been the same. Isaac was the one who would change the family forever. Because Isaac had a gift that nobody else in the family had. Isaac could see things other people couldn't. He could look at a drug operation, and within a week he would know exactly where the money was, where the product was, where the guards took their breaks, where the girlfriend lived, where the mother lived, where the kingpin slept on Tuesday nights. The streets called Isaac by a name that told you everything about him. Just me. No crew, no backup, no partners, just me. And in 1984, just me sat his four brothers down and told them the idea that was going to make them rich and kill every last one of them. Here's what just me figured out. He was 18 years old, barely out of high school, and he had looked around Queens and seen something nobody else had seen yet. Drug dealers could not call the police. Think about that for a second. A corner kid selling crack just made $4,000 in cash by sunset. Lieutenants were carrying $50,000 in duffel bags. Kingpins were sitting on millions in single apartments. All of it, every last dollar, was illegal money. If somebody kicked in the door and took it, the dealer had exactly zero options. Call the cops? The cops would ask where the $50,000 came from. The dealer would talk his way straight into a federal prison cell. Call a lawyer? Same problem. So what did the dealer do? Nothing. He took the loss. He made up a story for his supplier. He hoped it never happened again. And just me realized that this was the perfect crime. No police report, no detective, no trial, no prison. Just free money. Sitting in apartments all over New York City, protected only by the reputation of the men who owned it. And reputations, just me told his brothers, don't stop bullets. The Bolden started small. Nobody starts by robbing Fat Cat. They hit small-time hustlers, corner supervisors, dealers who worked 3 blocks. Just me would scout the spot for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes a month. He'd watch from a parked car. He'd follow the product back to the stash apartment. He'd learn which window the guard looked out of. He'd learn what time the girlfriend came home with groceries. Then the brothers would hit. Curtis's muscle, kicking down the door or walking in calm and putting a gun to the closest head. Henry. On the main gun, the eyes of the operation, watching everyone inside the apartment. Ernest on the back door, making sure nobody slipped out. Robert in the car outside, engine running. 3 minutes in, 3 minutes out. The first few hits got them a few $1,000s apiece, then $10,000, then $50,000. By early 1985, the Boldens had robbed so many small-time spots in Queens that word was starting to get around. A family, a black family from Queens. They don't sell, they only take, and they take from us. The word reached the bigger crews. But the bigger crews weren't worried, because the bigger crews had soldiers, security, lookouts on the roof with walkie-talkies. Kingpins in Queens operated out of apartments with steel-reinforced doors. Every delivery was escorted. Every stash house had 3 men inside, armed at all times. The bigger crews figured no family with 5 guys was coming for them. The bigger crews were wrong. In the summer of 1986, the Boldens crossed the bridge. Harlem in 1986 was the richest black neighborhood in America. Rich Porter was 21 years old and already a millionaire. Alpo Martinez was 20 and had a collection of luxury cars that would embarrass a movie star. AZ Faison was making $100,000 a week. All 3 of them operated out of apartments in Harlem. Apartments full of cash, full of product, full of jewelry that any jeweler in Manhattan would have paid 6 figures for. Just me picked AZ. Why AZ? Because AZ was the richest and Ozzy was the quietest. AZ avoided beef. AZ did not have a violent reputation like Alpo. AZ did not have street politics like Rich Porter. AZ just had money, lots and lots of money. Just. Me watched Ozzy's operation for weeks. He figured out where Ozzy kept his cash. He figured out who Ozzy trusted. He figured out which apartment held the real stash. And on a summer afternoon in 1986, the Boldens kicked down AZ's door. What happened next would be whispered about in Harlem for the next 30 years. AZ Faison was in the kitchen. 4 of his closest people were with him. Cash on the table, Product in the back room. Henry Bolden came in first, gun up. He started shooting immediately. The first of Ozzy's people dropped. The second, the third, the fourth. All 4 men dead on the kitchen floor in under 60 seconds. AZ took 9 bullets, 9, in his head, in his chest, in his arms, in his legs. He collapsed against the kitchen cabinet, blood pouring out of him, eyes closing. Henry Bolden stepped over his body, walked past the 4 dead friends, and grabbed the cash. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jewelry. Product. The Boldens walked out of that apartment in under 3 minutes. Ozzy Faison was left on the floor, bleeding to death. He should have died that day. 9 bullets, a kingpin with 4 dead friends around him. Nobody in Harlem expected Ozzy to live, but Ozzy lived. Doctors worked on him for hours. They dug bullets out of places human bodies are not supposed to have bullets. They told his mother he would not walk again. Then they told her he would not talk again. Then they told her he would have brain damage. Ozzy came out of the hospital weeks later, able to walk and talk. And Ozzy made a decision that no kingpin had ever made in New York history. Ozzy testified. He walked into a courtroom. He pointed at Henry Bolden. He told a jury exactly what happened in that apartment. Henry Bolden went to prison, but the other Boldens were still free. And the word that went out to every kingpin in New York City after the Ozzy robbery was simple. These men will kill you, even if they do not mean to. They will shoot everyone in the room and take your money, and they will walk away laughing. And every kingpin in Harlem, in Queens, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, every one of them changed their routines that week. Fat Cat Nichols, who was in prison by 1986, but still running his Queens operation through messengers, heard about the Ozzy robbery. He doubled security on every stash house. Alpo Martinez heard about it. He started sleeping in a different apartment every night. Supreme McGriff heard about it. His nephew Prince was running the Supreme team on the ground. They added rooftop lookouts with walkie-talkies over the entire Baisley Park houses. Every crew in New York City changed how they operated in the summer of 1986. Because of a family from Queens, because of 5 men with guns. The Boldens weren't the biggest crew in New York. They weren't the richest. They weren't the most numerous. But they had something the Kingpins didn't have. The Kingpins had empires. The Kingpins had corners, crews, distribution networks, suppliers, soldiers. The Boldens had nothing to lose. They didn't care about territory. They didn't care about respect. They didn't care about long-term power. All they wanted was what you had, and they would kill every single person in your apartment to get it. That's the kind of enemy that terrifies a kingpin, because a kingpin can negotiate with a rival. A kingpin can call a truce with another dealer. A kingpin can split territory with a competitor. You can't negotiate with a stick-up crew. Stick-up crews don't want your territory. They want what's inside it. And once they've taken it, there's nothing left to talk about. For 3 years, the Boldens lived the life every black kid in Queens dreamed about. They drove luxury cars. They wore designer clothes. They tipped valet drivers $100 for parking. They walked into nightclubs and ordered every bottle on the menu. Just Me bought his mother a new house. He kept his old address, though, the house he grew up in, with the concrete steps out front. That's where he slept when he needed to disappear. That's where he kept his real money. The brothers rotated between apartments in Queens and the Bronx, never more than 3 nights in the same bed. And they kept hitting. They hit a Supreme Team stash house and walked out with over $100,000 in cash. They hit a Fat Cat spot in Queens. They took the product, they took the money, and they left the guards tied up on the floor. They hit dealers in Brooklyn. They hit the Bronx. They even hit some Dominican operators in Washington Heights, men who would later become some of the most feared cartels on the East Coast. The Boldens didn't care. By 1987, the Bolden family had taken in an estimated $2 million in cash through stick-ups alone. $2 million. Most legitimate businesses in Queens didn't make $2 million in a decade. The Boldens made it in 3 years, in apartments at gunpoint from men who couldn't call the police. But they made one mistake they didn't understand yet. Every robbery created an enemy. Every dollar they took came from a man with soldiers, money, and time. And by the summer of 1987, those men had decided the Boldens had stolen from them for the last time. The first Bolden to die was Ernest. He was 23 years old. He was in Baltimore, Maryland, laying low while the heat in New York cooled off. He had a young woman with him. She was 19. One night, 2 men walked up on Ernest near a Baltimore apartment complex. They shot him until he stopped moving. They shot the woman too. Ernest Bolden died in designer clothes and fresh sneakers. His body lay on the pavement until someone called it in. By then, his body was cold. His family back in New York got the news, and they didn't stop. Which is the craziest part of this whole story. Ernest was dead. Their little brother, gunned down out of state. The Boldens kept robbing kingpins because they didn't know how to stop. Because robbing kingpins was the only thing they knew how to do. Because at 24, 25, 26 years old, they had already made more money and lived bigger than most people ever do. There was no going back to a regular life now, so they kept hitting spots. That decision would end everything. August 6, 1987, Queens, New York, Isaac. Just me. Bolden pulls up to his mother's house. He has been awake for 2 straight days. He has cash in his pocket. He has just finished scouting a new target. He is exhausted. He walks up the concrete steps of the house he grew up in. The same steps he had walked up as a 5-year-old, as a 12-year-old, as an 18-year-old planning his first robbery. He has his keys in his hand. He does not see the 2 men waiting in the shadows. The first bullet hits him in the back. The second. The third. Just me drops on the concrete steps. His mother is inside the house. She hears the gunfire. She runs to the front door. She opens it and she sees her son bleeding out on the porch of the house she raised him in. She drops to her knees. She screams his name. Just me looks up at her. He dies on the ambulance ride to the hospital. He was 25 years old. Across town that same week, Henry Bolden, already out on bail after the Aziz case, out on appeal, back in the Bronx, back in the streets, was ambushed at his apartment. Henry took bullets too, but Henry survived. Henry would never rob another kingpin in his life. Curtis and Robert heard about Just Me and Henry, and for the first time in 3 years, the Bolden family understood something. The game was over. For years, everyone in New York wondered the same thing. How did they find Just Me? Just Me was a ghost. He slept in different apartments every night. He did not use his real name. He did not have a phone in his name. He did not have a car in his name. He did not even have a mailing address in his name. How did 2 killers end up waiting for him on his mother's front porch? The answer came out years later, in a courtroom, in federal trial testimony. There was a woman named Ina McGriff. She was a parole officer in New York State. Middle-aged, respected, trusted. She was also on the payroll of the Supreme Team, the Queens crack crew that the Boldens had robbed, the crew run by Kenneth Supreme McGriff and his nephew Prince. Prince Miller paid Ina McGriff $3,000 in cash to look up the Bolden family in the New York State parole system. She pulled every file, every address, every known relative. She handed Prince a sheet of paper. On that paper was Henry Bolden's address in the Bronx and the address of Just Me Bolden's mother in Queens, $3,000. That was the price of Just Me's life. Later, when news reports mentioned a Bolden had been shot in Queens, Ina McGriff asked Prince about it. Was that the same Bolden she had given the address for? Prince did not answer yes, did not answer no. He just smirked. She knew. By 1988, the Bolden family had been broken. Just Me was dead. Ernest was dead. Henry was alive, but never the same, a shell of the shooter he had been. Curtis kept trying for a while. Small spots, local hits, but without Just Me's planning, he was working half-blind. He was eventually locked up on lesser charges. Robert, the youngest, disappeared from the streets. The Bolden mother was left in a house in Queens. Her son's blood still remembered on the front steps. Her other sons in prison or scared. She had watched her family rise from a middle-class household in the 1970s to the most feared stick-up crew in New York City. And she had watched them come apart in 3 years. Today, nobody raps about the Boldens. Nas rapped about Pappy Mason. Jay-Z rapped about Rich Porter. Cameron made a movie about Alpo. The Kings got remembered. The men who terrified them didn't. But every kingpin in New York City in the summer of 1987 slept a little easier after Just Me died. Because for 3 years, 5 men from a regular Queens family had made the richest drug dealers in America afraid to go home at night. Here's what the Bolden story really tells you. Fear doesn't follow money. Fear doesn't follow power. Fear doesn't follow territory. Fear follows nothing to lose. The kingpins of New York City had everything. Millions of dollars, cars, women, respect, corners, crews. All the Boldens had was each other and a willingness to die. And that was enough to make every king in the city afraid. That's why the streets talk about the Boldens in whispers 30 years later, even when the rap songs don't. Because everybody who ever sold a kilo of crack in the 1980s knew the same thing. You could have all the money in the world. You could have bodyguards. You could have rooftop lookouts. You could have steel-reinforced doors. None of it mattered. If Just Me Bolden decided you were next, you were next. And the only reason they stopped terrorizing the kingpins of New York City is because Ina McGriff sold an address for $3,000. Otherwise, the Boldens might still be robbing spots today. In 1986, there were 3 men every black kid in New York City wanted to be: Alpo, Rich Porter, AZ. But there were 5 men those 3 men were afraid of: Curtis Bolden, Henry Bolden, Ernest Bolden, Robert Bolden, and their cousin Isaac, the one the streets called Just Me. A family from Queens, 4 brothers and their cousin. They didn't sell drugs, they didn't build an empire, they didn't control territory, they just took from the richest, most feared men in New York City. For 3 years, they lived bigger than any of their childhood friends could imagine. Then their little brother died in Baltimore. Then their cousin died on his mother's front steps. Then their brother survived a Bronx ambush and went silent forever. 3 years of terrifying the kings of New York. 3 years of taking what they wanted. And in the end, nothing left but a mother on a porch, holding her dying son in a house she had raised him in. That's the Bolden brothers, the family that made the kings of New York afraid. In 1989, on the streets of Washington, D.C., the city they called the murder capital of America, drug dealers stopped driving nice cars. Not because they could not afford them, not because the police were watching, not because of any law, any task force, any crackdown, because of one man. If this man saw you in something flashy, he assumed you had money. And if he assumed you had money, he was coming to take it. Not tomorrow, not next week, Tonight, he would find out where you lived. He would walk to your house after dark. He would lay down in your yard, in the grass, behind the dumpster, in the bushes beside your front door, and he would wait all night, not moving, not making a sound, just breathing, slow, patient, like a man with nowhere else to be. And when you walked outside in the morning, thinking it was just another day, thinking you were safe because the sun was up and people were around, he would stand up, walk straight towards you, close enough to see your eyes, and put 7 rounds in your head like it was nothing. Then he would walk away, not run, just walk. Sometimes he would come back 20 minutes later, after the police arrived, after the ambulance showed up, after the yellow tape went around the body. He would come back to the crime scene, stand on the corner, watch, make sure nobody was talking to the cops. And nobody was. Nobody ever was. Because everybody on that block knew exactly who had done it. And everybody on that block knew exactly what would happen to them if they opened their mouth. He did not do drive-bys. He did not shoot from across the street. He did not send somebody else to handle his business. He walked up to you, personally, face to face, and he did it himself, every single time. "I don't play that across the street business," he said. "I walk right up and put 7 in the head like it ain't nothing." The biggest dealer in D.C. tried to buy his loyalty. He refused. Hustlers who had been getting money for years stopped flashing in public because they did not want this man to notice them. He robbed lawyers. He extorted drug lords. He hunted killers the way other men hunted deer, patient and methodical, without a trace of hesitation. One of his associates opened his car trunk one day and found hand grenades, sticks of dynamite, a rack of guns, and product. This man kept an arsenal the way most people keep a spare tire. The Washington Post called him one of the district's most heinous murderers. Don Diva magazine gave him a title that stuck, the Michael Jordan of the murder game. And in 2013, Jay-Z put his name in a verse on Magna Carta Holy Grail. "This is my Wayne Perry flow." Y'all know nothing about Wayne Perry, though, District of Columbia. Suddenly, millions of people who had never heard of Southwest D.C. were searching for a man who had been locked in a concrete box for 20 years. His name was Wayne Perry. The streets called him Silk. But here's what Jay-Z did not rap about. Here's what the Washington Post did not print. Here's what the streets still talk about in a whisper. The most feared killer in the history of the murder capital was brought down by the one person he trusted with his life, the man he protected, the man he killed for, the man he kept alive in jail when everyone else wanted him dead. That man looked him in the eye, shook his hand, called him brother, and then walked into a federal office and gave them every name, every body, every detail. And the first name he gave them was Silk. Years later, from a prison cell at the most secure facility in America, he said 7 words that I keep coming back to. 7 words that tell you everything about this story and everything about the man who lived it. "I am a very loyal man." He was. And that loyalty is what destroyed him. This is the story of Wayne Silk Perry, the man who hunted killers in the murder capital, and the lesson he learned too late about what loyalty gets you when you give it to a snake. To understand what Wayne Perry became, you have to understand where he came from. Not the man, the place. Because the place explains everything. Southwest Washington, D.C. Some people called it Chocolate City. Others called it Drama City. Most people just called it what it was, one of the worst ghettos in America. Tenement houses, fleabag motels, rat-infested apartment buildings. And on L Street, in the section they called 203, a stretch of blocks so bad that even the rest of Southwest didn't want to claim it. 203 had the worst violence, the worst crime, the worst of everything the city had decided to pour into one place and forget about. The people who grew up there had two ways out: sports or crime. That was it. No third option, no backup plan, no guidance counselor sitting you down to talk about college applications. You either had talent or you had nerve, and if you were lucky, you had both. Wayne Anthony Perry was born November 14, 1962. He grew up right there on L Street in 203 and spent his summers down in Georgia with family. But D.C. was home. And in D.C., from the time he was old enough to hold a bat, he was the best athlete anyone had ever seen. Baseball, boxing, basketball, football, MVP in everything he touched. His half-brother Lop gave him a nickname for how smooth he moved on the field: Silk. But here's the thing about growing up in 203. The older hustlers watched this kid play sports, watched him compete, watched him fight, watched how he carried himself, and they didn't see a future baseball player. They didn't see a scholarship. They didn't see a way out. They saw a weapon. They knew I'd shoot anybody, Silk told Don Diva magazine years later. Police, killers, guerrillas. I used to go on robberies with some serious gangsters, but they always took the bullets out of my gun because they said I was trigger happy. Let me say that again. Grown men, experienced criminals robbing banks, and they took the bullets out of the kid's gun before they went inside, because even they were afraid of what a 13-year-old Wayne Perry might do if the gun was loaded. By 1974, Silk was 12 years old and had already caught his first body. By 1975, he was hustling full-time. By 1976, he was running crooked dice games and marked card scams on grown men twice his age. The older gamblers took him everywhere because they thought the kid was lucky. He wasn't lucky. He was cheating them. And he was 14 years old. Silk attended Wilson High School, supposedly a place to get an education. In reality, it was a gladiator school. Northwest gangs versus Southwest gangs. Riots in the hallways every week. Unarmed guards in every corridor because the school couldn't afford anything better. One day, a riot broke out. Somebody shot one of the guards. Police came. Every gangbanger in that hallway pointed at Silk. He insisted he didn't do it. He said the real shooters set him up because they knew he wouldn't snitch, and he would write it out. He was charged with attempted murder. The court dismissed it for lack of evidence. Wilson expelled him anyway. They sent him to Randall High School, where he played baseball, boxed, and played basketball and football. He was still the best athlete on every team he touched. Until one day at practice, he beat his baseball coach with a bat. Not a fist fight, not an argument that got out of hand. A bat, during practice, on the field, in front of the entire team. They didn't just expel him from Randall. They didn't just kick him off the team. They banned Wayne Perry from every single public school in the District of Columbia. A judge ordered him to attend Franklin GED school. According to Silk, somebody at Franklin made the mistake of threatening to take his chain. That person did not take the chain. By the late 1970s, school was over. Silk graduated to the streets. Bank robberies at 16. His little brother was killed by police inside a bank in 1979. Whatever thin wire had been holding Silk back from going all the way over, it snapped. It never reconnected. In 1984, a man came looking for Silk. He found him on the street. The man pulled a gun and fired. Missed. Silk didn't miss. He killed the man right in front of a parked police car. The officers sitting inside the car testified it was self-defense. A man shot dead on the sidewalk with police watching, and they called it self-defense. That tells you what Silk's reputation was in 1984. Even the police weren't going to argue with him, but it was still a body. They sent him to Lorton's Youth Center 1, one of the most violent prisons in America at the time. Going into Youth Center 1 was like going into a war zone. The inmates ran the facility. Kill or be killed. Not a metaphor, literal. Silk didn't just survive Lorton, he thrived. He came out in 1987 with a new skill set, a new reputation, and a new business plan. He wasn't going to hustle anymore. He wasn't going to rob banks. He wasn't going to play dice or run card scams. He was going to hunt people for money. And Washington, D.C., the city that was about to become the murder capital of the United States, had no idea what was walking back into it. You need to understand what D.C. was in the late 1980s, because without that context, what Silk did sounds like exaggeration. It's not. The crack epidemic had turned the nation's capital into a slaughterhouse. In 1991, Washington, D.C. recorded 482 murders, 80.6 per 100,000 residents, the highest rate in the United States. They didn't call it Chocolate City anymore. They called it the murder capital, and that name was earned in blood. 482 bodies in a city of 600,000 people. If New York had the same rate, it would have been nearly 6,000 murders in a single year. D.C. was the most dangerous place in the United States, and it was not close. Rayful Edmond was flooding the streets with product. The Shower Posse was tearing up neighborhoods. Teenagers were dying on corners every single night. The police couldn't stop it. The government couldn't stop it. Nobody could stop it. And in the middle of all that chaos, while every dealer, every hustler, every killer in D.C. was making the most money they'd ever seen, there was one man who was scarier than all of it combined. Drug dealers stopped driving nice cars. Because if Silk noticed you, if Silk decided you had something he wanted, there was no negotiation. There was no paying him off. There was no talking your way out of it. Rayful Edmond, the single biggest supplier D.C. had ever seen, a man moving more product than anyone in the city, tried to buy Silk's loyalty. He dropped loads of supply down to 203. Free product, a peace offering from the most powerful dealer in Washington. Silk refused. Nah, I'm cool, I don't want nothing from you. Think about that. The most powerful dealer in the history of D.C. tries to buy you, tries to bring you into his operation, offers you a seat at the biggest table in the city, and you say no, not because you have a better deal, not because you're afraid of the heat, because you don't want to be owned by anyone. Silk wanted to make his own way. He had a game plan, and that game plan was simple. He would take what he wanted from anyone who was too weak to stop him. He would kill anyone who needed killing for the right price. And he would answer to nobody, not Rayful Edmond, not the police, not the federal government, nobody. Here's what made Silk different from every other killer in the murder capital. And there were hundreds. D.C. had bodies dropping every night. But nobody operated like Wayne Perry. Most killers are reactive. Somebody disrespects them, they react. Somebody moves on their corner, they react. Somebody snitches, they react. Silk was proactive. He did not wait for problems. He went looking for them. He hunted. One time, a friend had his corner taken over by a dealer from New York. The New Yorker told Silk's boy he could not hustle there until the New Yorker was done. Silk's friend came to him scared. Silk told the kid to go back outside and sell. The kid hesitated. Silk told him, "If I said it's cool, it's cool." The kid went back to the corner. The New York dealer came around the building to say something about it. Silk stepped out of the cut beside the wall and emptied every round in the clip into the man's head. Then he walked back inside and kept talking. like nothing happened. Another time, he made a man strip naked in a mall. Broad daylight. People everywhere. He made the man choke off every piece of clothing and then shot him right there to prove to everyone watching that the man was not as tough as he claimed. He popped up at outdoor basketball tournaments and gunned down targets in the middle of a crowd. He killed at the lunch rush. He killed with police a block away. He killed on corners where 50 people were standing, and when he walked away, nobody saw a thing. And his trunk. One of his associates opened Silk's car trunk one day and found hand grenades, sticks of dynamite, a rack of guns, and product. This man kept a small arsenal in his car, the way most people keep a spare tire. One associate from that era said that when Silk first started taking money for hits, nobody in the city even knew who was doing it. People were saying it was a hitman from Detroit somewhere. It was not a hitman from Detroit. It was a man from L Street who slept in your yard and waited until the sun came up. In 1989, Rayful Edmond got locked up. The biggest supplier in D.C. was gone. His territory was wide open. Every corner, every strip, every block that Rayful had controlled was suddenly up for grabs. From Harlem, a flashy, smooth-talking dealer named Alberto Alpo Martinez looked at that vacancy the way a shark looks at blood in the water. Alpo was already famous. He had run with Rich Porter and Ozzie Faison, the three Harlem dealers whose story would become the movie Paid in Full, with Cameron playing Alpo's character. But Alpo had a problem. He had killed his own best friend, Rich Porter, over money. He shot him dead. And Rich Porter's 12-year-old brother, Donald, had been kidnapped for ransom and turned up dead. New York was burning for Alpo. He needed a new city. D.C. was the answer. But D.C. hustlers did not play with outsiders. And Alpo, for all his flash and all his money, knew he needed one thing he could not buy in Harlem. He needed a killer, not just any killer. He needed the killer, the one nobody in D.C. would challenge, the one whose name alone could clear a room. He needed Silk. There are two versions of how they met. Silk's version was that he wanted to kill Alpo before they ever shook hands. A woman had told Silk that Alpo was putting a hit on him. Silk went hunting. His close associate, Lil Pop, stepped in at the East Side Club and introduced them. Alpo begged for his life. Alpo's version was that he bailed Silk out of jail, and Silk was so grateful he became his bodyguard. The truth does not matter. What matters is the result. Silk became Alpo's enforcer, his hitman, his shield, the man who made sure nobody touched Alpo's operation anywhere in D.C., Virginia, or Maryland. And business exploded. The Martinez organization moved roughly 500 kilograms of product valued at $65 million through 4 states. Silk was the engine. Alpo was the mouth. Together, they were the most dangerous partnership in the murder capital. But it was never equal. It was never a partnership between two men. It was one man doing all the work and one man keeping all the records. Silk was the one dropping bodies. Silk was the one hunting targets in the dark. Silk was the one making sure Alpo could sleep safely at night. And Alpo? Alpo was taking notes, writing down names, memorizing details, building a file he did not know he was building yet, because Alpo was born with a gift that Silk never had and never understood, the ability to betray without hesitation. Between 1989 and 1991, the Martinez organization left 9 bodies across Washington, D.C. Federal authorities would later allege that Silk was the main shooter in 8 of those 9. Domenico Benson, a Brooklyn dealer who slapped Alpo's wife. Silk walked up to Benson while the man was shaking Alpo's hand, shaking his hand, and shot him dead right there, mid-handshake. Gary Terrell, a rival dealer in Washington, D.C., who made the mistake of putting a hit on Silk. Silk got to him first. He always got to them first. But the killing that tells you everything, the one that haunts this story, is Evelyn Carter. Carter was Silk's girlfriend. She was talking to police. They were investigating the murder of a dealer named Michael Frey Salters, and Carter had information that could connect Silk to the killing. But here is the twist that makes your stomach turn. According to Silk, he did not kill Frey. A member of his own crew, a man named Michael Jackson, killed Frey on Alpo's orders. Then Jackson went to Frey's funeral and told everyone Silk did it. Evelyn Carter heard the lie at that funeral, and Jackson, to cover himself, told Silk that Carter was the one running her mouth. So Silk, out of loyalty to a man who was framing him, killed the woman in his own life. After a Keith Sweat concert at Constitution Hall, Silk grabbed Evelyn Carter. He stabbed her in the face. He shot her 5 times. Dead. Years later, in a prison cell, Silk said the following, "May she rest in peace. If I would have let her talk, she would have told me the truth. But I would not have listened because I stand for loyalty, and my loyalty was with that dude. That was my man, but he was a snake. He killed the one person who could have saved him because he was loyal to the one person who was destroying him. And he was about to find out just how loyal that person was in return." On November 6, 1991, federal authorities arrested Alpo Martinez. Drug charges, murder charges, conspiracy, everything. They put Alpo into a Washington, D.C. jail where half the inmates wanted him dead. Rivals, enemies, men who had been waiting for the day Alpo did not have Silk standing next to him. Who kept him alive? Silk. From inside the same jail system, Silk put the word out. Anyone who touches Alpo will not live to see the outside. Not a threat, a guarantee from the most feared man in the building. Nobody touched Alpo. Not one person. The most hated snitch to be in Washington, D.C., walked through that jail untouched because Wayne Perry said so. Now think about what is happening at the same time. Down the hall, behind a closed door, Alpo is sitting across from federal prosecutors, and he is singing. Every name, every body, every detail, every murder Silk committed. Every murder Silk did not commit that Alpo pinned on him anyway. The man Silk was protecting was the man burying him. The man Silk was willing to die for was the man signing his death warrant. Silk later said he was a very loyal man. He said he did not fear anything or anyone but God. The fear of weaker guys put him in prison. The fear of weaker guys. He is not talking about the feds. He is not talking about the police. He is talking about Alpo. The man who was too weak to stand up and take his own weight. The man who gave up everyone around him to save himself. The man who was weaker than anyone Silk had ever hunted on the streets of D.C. And that weak man's words put Silk in a cage for the rest of his life. December 4, 1992. Silk walked into court expecting to plead guilty to a minor charge, selling product to an undercover police officer, a fine, maybe a few months. Instead, the Safe Streets Task Force was waiting. They arrested him in the courtroom and charged him with the murder of Garrett Terrell in furtherance of a continuing criminal enterprise. December 5, 1992. The Washington Times ran a headline saying, "Suspected hitman arrested in 1991 killing, March 6, 1993. The Washington Post reported a 27-count indictment. Wayne Perry, Tyrone Price, and Michael Jackson were charged with 9 murders, racketeering conspiracy, drug distribution conspiracy, retaliating against a witness, kidnapping, and robbery. And then the federal government did something that had not been done in D.C. since 1971. They sought the death penalty. Wayne Silk Perry was going to be the first person executed in the District of Columbia in over 20 years. The voters of D.C. had just rejected the death penalty by a 2-to-1 margin. But this was federal court, federal statute, and a 1987 law said murder in furtherance of a drug conspiracy was a death-eligible offense. They were measuring Silk for a casket, using Alpo's words as the tape measure. April 1, 1994. The Washington Post ran a headline that said, "Killer cop's plea gets life sentence in 5 murders." Silk pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, naming Domenico Benson, Evelyn Carter, Yolanda Burley, Alveda Hopkins, and Garrett Terrell, plus continuing criminal enterprise. In exchange, the death penalty came off the table. Silk told Don Diva that he had not copped out because of the death penalty. He said he lived to die, and that he copped out to make sure others did not get life. He said he took the bull by the horns to save others. That was the kind of man he was. Even at the end, even with the walls closing in, even knowing that Alpo had betrayed him, that everything he had built was gone, that he would never walk a free street again, he was still protecting other people. 5 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole, ever. They shackled him, handcuffed him, loaded him into a transport vehicle, and shipped him to ADX, Florence, Colorado, the federal supermax, the most secure prison in America, the place where they put the men the government never wants to see again. Silk was 31 years old. For snitching on Silk and dozens of others, Alpo Martinez received 35 years, not 5 life sentences, 35 years, for confessing to 14 murders, including killing his own best friend, Rich Porter. Silk got life for 5. Alpo got 35 for 14. Read that again and tell me how it sits with you. In 2015, the federal government released Alpo, gave him a new name, Abraham Rodriguez, dropped him in Lewiston, Maine. Population 36,000, quiet town, polite neighbors. Nobody knew who he was. He helped old people take out their trash. But Alpo could not leave it alone. He could not be Abraham Rodriguez. By 2019, he was back in Harlem, making YouTube videos, bragging about the old days, riding motorcycles through the same blocks where he had sold product 30 years earlier, throwing away his witness protection like it was a used napkin. October 31st, 2021, Halloween night, 3:30 a.m., 147th Street and Frederick Douglass Boulevard, Harlem. Alpo Martinez was sitting in his red Dodge Ram pickup when somebody walked up to the driver's side window. 5 shots, chest, chin, arm. He drove 1 more block, crashed, and in his final moments, bleeding out in the driver's seat, he threw bags of product out the window. Still dealing, still hustling, still running the game, even as he died. He was pronounced dead at Harlem Hospital. Rich Porter's family poured champagne in the streets. The man charged with the murder was acquitted in 2024. The killing remains effectively unsolved. Meanwhile, inside ADX Florence, behind concrete walls 3 feet thick, Silk sits. He converted to Islam, changed his name to Nkosi Shaka Zulu L. He has been in that cell for over 30 years. He will never leave. The man who snitched walked free and died on the street at 3 a.m., throwing supplies out his window. The man who stayed loyal will never breathe free air again. Washington, D.C. recorded 482 murders in 1991, the year Silk was at his peak. In 2012, that number dropped to 88. The streets Silk terrorized have coffee shops and condos now. The corners where people died have strollers on them. The murder capital is not the murder capital anymore. And the most feared man who ever walked its streets is locked in a box in Colorado, forgotten by everyone except the people who grew up in 203. The people who read Seth Ferrante's book and the millions who heard Jay-Z say his name and had to look him up. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that makes this story different from every other gangster story on the internet. Silk was not brought down by the police. He was not brought down by a rival. He was not brought down by a task force or an investigation or a wire. He was brought down by the one person he loved enough to kill for, to protect in jail, to take 5 life sentences for. He was the greatest hunter the murder capital ever produced. He could find anyone, track anyone, wait all night in the dark for anyone. He could read the streets like a book. He could smell danger from a block away. But he could not see the snake sitting right next to him, eating his food, spending his money, calling him brother. Because loyalty blinded him, and loyalty, the same loyalty that made him the most feared and the most respected man in D.C., is what put him in that box. "I am a very loyal man," he said. "I don't fear nothing and no one but God. The fear of weaker guys put me in prison." 7 words. The fear of weaker guys put me in prison. He does not blame the feds. He does not blame the judge. He does not blame the system. He blames the weakness of the man he trusted. And that is the lesson. Not about guns, not about the streets, not about the murder capital. The lesson is this: the thing that makes you great can be the exact same thing that destroys you, and you will not see it coming, because it is not coming from your enemies. It is coming from the person sitting right next to you. Think about that. Miami, 1985. A crack house in a poor neighborhood on the south side of the city. 5 people inside, cooking, cutting, counting money. Just another night. A crew walks in. No masks, no hesitation. They don't ask for the product. They don't ask for the money. They don't ask for anything. They open fire. 5 bodies. On the floor, in the kitchen, in the hallway. Blood on every wall. The crew takes the product, takes the cash, steps over the bodies, gets in the car, drives away. When Miami-Dade detectives arrive, they find something that makes their blood run cold. The shooters didn't use pistols. They used military-grade automatic weapons, M16 rifles, the kind of firepower you see in a war zone, not a crack house in South Florida. And the detective assigned to the case, a tough Irish-American cop named Kevin Doherty, says something to his partner that changes the direction of the investigation. This wasn't a robbery, this was a message. The message came from a gang that most Americans had never heard of. They didn't come from New York. They didn't come from Los Angeles. They didn't come from Chicago. They came from a concrete housing project in Kingston, Jamaica. They called themselves the Shower Posse. Not because they showered people with money, not because they showered people with gifts, because they showered entire neighborhoods with bullets. And by the time law enforcement figured out what they were dealing with, 1,400 people were dead on American soil. The Crips never did that. The Bloods never did that. The Italian mob never did that. One Jamaican gang from one neighborhood left more bodies in America than any organization in the history of the country. And the most insane part? Their own government helped create them. To understand the Shower Posse, you have to understand Tivoli Gardens. Tivoli Gardens is a housing project in West Kingston, Jamaica. But calling it a housing project does not come close to describing what it really was. In the 1960s, a politician named Edward Seaga, leader of the Jamaica Labour Party, bulldozed a Rastafarian shanty town called Bacco Wall and built Tivoli Gardens on top of it. He filled the new community with his most loyal supporters, every family, every apartment, hand-picked. Tivoli Gardens was not housing, it was a fortress, a voting block, a military base disguised as a neighborhood. Seaga had invented something that would poison Jamaica for the next 4 decades, the garrison community. A neighborhood where one political party controlled everything, the housing, the gyps, the protection, and in exchange you voted the way they told you. The rival party, the People's National Party, saw what Siaga did and built their own garrisons, packed them with their supporters, armed them, and then the two sides went to war. The 1980 Jamaican election was the bloodiest in the country's history. Over 800 people were murdered. 800. In a country smaller than Connecticut, 3/4 of the dead were killed by gunmen from the garrisons. That election put Siaga in power, and it put the men who had killed for him in a position to collect. The most dangerous of those men lived in Tivoli Gardens. His name was Lester Lloyd Coke. They called him Jim Brown. Lester Lloyd Coke was born in Kingston. He was raised in Denham Town, a neighborhood controlled by the rival PNP. As a young man, he was a PNP enforcer. But at 19, he was shot and left for dead by his own people. JLP doctors from Tivoli Gardens saved his life. That betrayal and that rescue switched Coke's loyalty forever. He became Edward Seaga's most dangerous soldier, the man who controlled Tivoli Gardens through force, fear, and an understanding of violence that went beyond anything the politicians had planned for. After the 1980 election, Coke took over from the previous Don of Tivoli, Claude Massop, who had been killed in a police shootout in 1979. Coke became the new Don Dada, the Godfather, the untouchable. He used the money from the product trade and later cocaine to feed the poor. He built community centers. He gave jobs. He settled disputes. He became a one-man government inside Tivoli Gardens. Police could not enter without his permission. Politicians came to him for favors. And Siaga himself called Coke a protector of Tivoli Gardens' poor. A politician calling a gang leader a protector. In public, on the record. That was Jamaica. But Jim Brown was not satisfied with Kingston, because in the early 1980s, something happened that changed the economics of Caribbean crime forever. Edward Siaga launched a program to destroy Jamaica's marijuana farms in exchange for American aid. Marijuana was one of Jamaica's biggest cash crops. Most of it went to America. When Siaga burned the fields, the traffickers did not stop trafficking. They just switched products. Jamaica sat perfectly between Colombia's Atlantic coast and South Florida. The Colombian cartels needed a transshipment point, and Jim Brown was happy to provide one. Cocaine replaced marijuana, and the money got bigger than anything Tivoli Gardens had ever seen. But the real money was not in Jamaica, it was in America. In the early 1980s, Jim Brown and his partner Vivian Blake made a decision that would change American crime forever. They sent their soldiers to the United States. Blake, privately educated, articulate, and strategic, set up the American operation. He started in Toronto, then New York, then Miami, then everywhere: New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Chicago, Newark, Camden, Atlantic City, Trenton, Bridgeton, East Orange, Irvington, cell by cell, city by city. The Shower Posse built a distribution network across the entire eastern seaboard and into the Midwest. And they brought something that American gangs had never seen before: total, absolute military-grade violence. The Crips and Bloods fought over corners. The Shower Posse did not fight over corners. They eliminated corners. If a rival crew was on a block, the Shower Posse did not negotiate, and they did not intimidate. They drove up and opened fire on everyone standing on the street. Everyone: dealers, lookouts, bystanders, women. It did not matter. Showered with bullets. That is where the name came from. They shot up a packed Firemen's Benevolent Hall in Fort Lauderdale, wounding 3 and killing their target, a reggae DJ. They opened fire at a soccer match in Bunch Park, killing a professional soccer player named Colin Fowles. 5 people were murdered in a single crack house massacre in Miami. 2 posse hitmen tried to shoot their way out of a police sting in a warehouse. Both went down in a blaze of gunfire. And this was just Miami. In New York, in Philadelphia, in Kansas City, the same thing was happening. Different city, same playbook. Show up, shower, leave. By the late 1980s, law enforcement estimated the Shower Posse had murdered 1,400 people on American soil. 1,400. The Italian Mafia's most violent decade produced nothing close to that number. The Crips and Bloods combined did not match it. No American criminal organization in history had left that many bodies in that short a time. And it was all controlled from a pastel-colored housing project in Kingston that the police were afraid to enter. Now here's where this story goes from insane to unbelievable. In 1989, a former Shower Posse member named Charles Little Nut Miller was arrested for trafficking. He agreed to testify against gang leadership in exchange for immunity. In his testimony, where he admitted to 9 murders himself, Miller dropped a bomb. He said the Shower Posse had been trained, armed, and transported to the United States by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. CIA. Miller described his connection to the Jamaica Labor Party as a political enforcer. He described how the American government had supported the JLP fight against the PCNP, which was seen as too close to Fidel Castro's Cuba during the Cold War. His exact words to the court were, "The United States made me what I am." The CIA had backed Edward Seaga's JLP. The JLP used garrison gangs like the Shower Posse as enforcers, and those same enforcers, armed and trained with CIA support, were now flooding American cities with crack cocaine and killing 1,400 Americans. The weapons that killed Americans in Miami crack houses may have been provided by the American government to fight communism in the Caribbean. Think about what that means. Jim Brown wasn't just violent in America. Back home in Kingston, he was even worse. In May 1984, Koch led a group of armed men from Tivoli Gardens into a nearby community called Wilton Gardens, known as Rima. Rima was technically a JLP neighborhood, but factions there were angry that the community was being neglected while Tivoli got everything. Jim Brown decided to teach them a lesson. 12 people were killed in what became known as the Rima Massacre. An arrest warrant was issued. But Koch did not go to prison. He went to Miami. With an active arrest warrant in Jamaica, Jim Brown had no trouble boarding a plane to the United States. He set up shop in South Florida, betting on horse races at the Columbus Hotel, partying at clubs in Brooklyn, and running the American operation alongside Vivian Blake. He had been in America barely 6 weeks when he was robbed at a crack house. He was high on cocaine at the time. His response was another massacre. 5 people dead in one night. That was Jim Brown's answer to everything. You disrespect him, bodies fall. In 1987, under pressure from American authorities, Koch slipped back into Jamaica. He was arrested on the old Rima warrant, but the trial was a joke. Every witness disappeared. Not a single person showed up to testify. Jim Brown was acquitted. He told friends he was going to run against Edward Seaga for prime minister. A gang leader, acquitted of a massacre because witnesses were too afraid to testify, talking about becoming the leader of the country. That's how powerful the Shower Posse had become. And then there's this. December 3rd, 1976, 2 days before a massive peace concert organized by Bob Marley at the National Heroes Park in Kingston, 7 gunmen broke into Marley's home at 56 Hope Road. They opened fire. Bob Marley was shot in the arm and chest. His wife Rita was shot in the head. The bullet grazed her skull. His manager Don Taylor was hit by 5 bullets. All 3 survived. The Netflix documentary Remastered, Who Shot the Sheriff, identified Lester Lloyd Coke as present and participating in the attack on Bob Marley. The motivation was political. The PNP was trying to use Marley's concert as a party event. The JLP, through its enforcers, sent a message. They shot the most famous musician on the planet. And the man identified as being in the room was Jim Brown. In October 1988, a federal grand jury in Miami indicted 34 members of the Shower Posse. Jim Brown, Vivian Blake, Blake's 2 half-brothers, Errol Hussing and Tony Bruce, who ran the New York operation. All of them, 62 counts, RICO charges, trafficking, murder, the full weight of American law enforcement. The U.S. demanded extradition. Jim Brown was arrested in Kingston, and that is when the Shower Posse started to eat itself. While Jim Brown sat in a Kingston jail cell awaiting extradition, his son Mark Anthony Coke, known as Ja T, took over day-to-day operations. On February 2nd, 1992, Ja T was riding his motorcycle through downtown Kingston when gunmen from a rival crew called the Black Roses opened fire. Ja T was dead. The reprisals were immediate. 12 people were killed in Kingston over the next 2 weeks. Over 40,000 people attended Ja T's funeral. 40,000 for a 22-year-old gang member, and then, hours after the funeral, while the mourners were still changing out of their clothes, news broke from the general penitentiary. Lester Lloyd Coke was dead, of fire in his cell, the night before he was scheduled to be extradited to the United States. Officials called it an accident. Nobody in Jamaica believed that for a second. The most dangerous man on the island, the man who could testify about the CIA, about political connections, about decades of organized violence, was dead in a mysterious fire the night before he was supposed to leave the country. Jim Brown knew too much, and somebody made sure he never talked. Jim Brown's youngest son was 23 years old when his father burned to death in that cell. His name was Christopher Coke. His street name was Dudas. Dudas was nothing like his father. Where Jim Brown was loud, violent, and reckless, Dudas was quiet, contemplative, a strict vegetarian. He had attended one of Jamaica's elite private schools, Arden High School, alongside the children of politicians and business leaders. He took over the Shower Posse at 23, and he ran it differently. There was less violence on American streets and more business, more strategy. He installed surveillance cameras around Tivoli Gardens. He used technology that law enforcement did not have. He built community programs, feeding the poor, creating jobs, and setting up youth centers. He was so beloved in Tivoli Gardens that Jamaican police literally could not enter the neighborhood without the community's permission. His people called him the President. Graffiti appeared across Kingston. It read, "Jesus died for us. We will die for Dudus." For nearly 2 decades, from 1992 to 2010, Dudas ran the Shower Posse and Tivoli Gardens with a level of control that made his father's reign look like chaos. And the Americans could not touch him. It took U.S. prosecutors until 2009 to indict Coke, even though they cited crimes going back to 1994. They charged him with trafficking tons of cocaine and marijuana, plus firearms smuggling, but they could not directly link him to a single murder in the United States. Dudas had learned from his father's mistakes. He kept his distance. He kept it quiet. He kept it clean on paper. In 2009, the United States demanded that Jamaica extradite Dudus Koch to New York. The Prime Minister of Jamaica, Bruce Golding, a JLP politician, refused. For 9 months, the Prime Minister of an entire country protected a gang leader from American justice. He claimed the United States used illegal wiretaps to gather evidence. He stalled. He negotiated. He tried everything to keep Dudus in Jamaica. The Jamaican public was outraged, not because they wanted to protect Dudus, because they saw a prime minister protecting a drug lord at the expense of the country's reputation. On May 17, 2010, Golding relented. An arrest warrant was issued for Christopher Koch, and Tivoli Gardens went to war. Koch supporters armed themselves. They built barricades across the streets, concrete barriers, uprooted street lamps, anything they could find. They set fires. They opened fire on police. On May 24, 2010, the Jamaican government declared a state of emergency. 2,000 soldiers and police, the largest military mobilization in Jamaican history since independence, launched a full-scale assault on Tivoli Gardens. Urban warfare in a Caribbean capital in 2010. The battle lasted for days. Soldiers fought from building to building, snipers on rooftops. Automatic weapons fire echoed through the concrete corridors of the garrison. When it was over, 73 civilians were dead. Hundreds were injured. Entire blocks of apartments were riddled with bullet holes. Streets were destroyed. 73 people died so the government could arrest one man. And Dudus was not even there. For a month after the invasion, Christopher Koch was a ghost. He escaped Tivoli Gardens before the military arrived. He hid. He moved through safe houses. He planned. And then he tried to surrender on his own terms. Dudus contacted Reverend Al Miller, one of Jamaica's most influential evangelical pastors, and asked him to broker a surrender directly to the U.S. Embassy, not to the Jamaican police. Dudus believed, just like Larry Davis in the Bronx, just like George Wright in New Jersey, that if he surrendered to the local cops, he would never make it to a courtroom alive. On June 22, 2010, a car was stopped at a routine roadblock outside Kingston. Inside, a figure wearing a woman's wig, women's sunglasses, carrying a second wig. The most wanted man in the Caribbean was trying to reach the U.S. Embassy dressed as a woman. Security forces recognized him through the disguise. Christopher Dudus Koch, the president, was arrested in a WAG. He was extradited to New York. He pleaded guilty to racketeering and assault in August 2011. He was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison in June 2012. Reverend Al Miller was arrested for trying to help him flee. Prime Minister Golding, the man who had protected Dudus for 9 months, resigned in disgrace. The Shower Posse started in one neighborhood, Tivoli Gardens, a concrete fortress built by a politician who wanted to win elections. From that one neighborhood, they spread to Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Chicago, Toronto, London. They helped drive the American crack epidemic. They left 1,400 bodies on American soil. They may have been armed by the CIA. Their founder may have shot Bob Marley. Their leader burned to death in a jail cell the night before he was supposed to talk. Their next leader's supporters built barricades and fought the Jamaican military in the streets. 73 civilians died in the operation to arrest one man. The prime minister who protected him resigned, and the man himself was caught in a wig trying to reach the U.S. Embassy. After Dudus was taken down, Jamaica's national homicide rate dropped by 32%. 32%. One gang, one arrest, 1/3 of a country's murders gone. That is how much damage the Shower Posse did. Not just to America, to their own country. Tivoli Gardens is still there. The bullet holes are still in the walls. The barricades have not all been cleared. The murals of the old Dons, Jim Brown, Ja T, and the soldiers who died in the 2010 invasion are still painted on the buildings. The Shower Posse was not a gang. It was a government within a government, armed by politicians, trained by the CIA, exported to America, and when it got too powerful, when the monster they created turned on its creators, it took an army to stop it. 1,400 bodies in America, 73 civilians killed in one operation, one man caught in a wig, and it all started in a pastel-colored housing project that the police were afraid to enter.